I think we want to discuss whether the reality is as promised and what challenges have been, and whether the EU settlement scheme has been as simple as made out to be. We want to make sure that we reach people who may not know that they need to apply to the settlement scheme. We want to avoid a potential Windrush scandal in the future. So I'm delighted to welcome our three speakers: Elena Remigi from the INMO project, Monique Hawkins from the 3 Million, and Matt Rodder, Member of Parliament for Reading East. So hi and welcome. Because we know, Matt, that you have to possibly dash out and vote on the internal market bill, shall I come to you first? Are you now? We still can't see you, by the way.
That's a pleasure. I'm really sorry. I've been trying to fix the camera on my computer. I'm in my office and the PC quite clearly has a camera on it, and other parliamentarians seem to be able to get access to their video. I've not been able to figure out how to do this. I had another problem with another call this afternoon. I'm really sorry, but I haven't been able to yet get somebody from digital support to fix it. So if you can bear with me just speaking, if that's okay. I've tried almost everything I can.
That's all right. So if anyone wants to Google a picture of Matt Rodder, they can have a picture next to them or visualise him speaking. So Matt, you're the MP for Reading East. You're my MP actually, and I know you're concerned about Brexit and the ongoing negotiations, and you have been pressing the government on a number of issues, including the settled scheme. So can you just tell us a bit about how you're representing the 7,000 EU citizens in your constituency of Reading East?
Well, there are a number of things that I'm doing at the moment, Maddie, and thank you very much. And I'm really sorry about this picture, although it's not really worth having anyway. So the first thing that I'm doing, obviously, is to try to stand up for residents and anybody else who's concerned about Brexit, and the debate this afternoon and this evening is an important part of that. I should just say that we're on the committee stage of the UK Internal Market Bill. I spoke briefly on Monday when it was at its second reading. There are various amendments being considered, and it sounds as though we may be voting about 8 o'clock, but there's still some discussion about when exactly will happen. So if a bell starts to ring in the background, that's me being called to vote, and I'll have to pop out for that. I'm also not clear if it's one vote or more than one vote, just to let you know. So there may be some time when I'm out of the meeting, but I'll obviously try and come back. So the things that I'm doing, first of all, are to just represent people in Parliament and raise concerns. But more specifically in terms of people's residency rights, I've been meeting with ministers about it. I've been raising problems that individual residents have, and also issues that are more widely spread across the community. So, for example, the problem of people who don't have a complete record of their residency in the UK, that they've obviously been here, but maybe they haven't got a pay slip, or they perhaps don't have a full set of bills or other things of that type. So on both those fronts, I'm talking about individual, unusual cases and the more generic standard problems that people have. Lack of evidence is one issue. Another point is that there are particular groups of people who the settled status scheme is still really not easily designed to help them kind of accommodate to manage the process. So an example of that would be children who are in care. So there are some children who are in care who are EU citizens who are currently resident in the UK, and there are apparently cases around the country of these children not having their applications processed effectively because they don't have a parent to act on their behalf. They might have a corporate parent in the local authority, but it's whether the social worker in question is able to fully take the process through. So those are some kind of general points of policy which I'm trying to press the government on. And I've either spoken in Parliament and in some cases met with ministers to raise those specific points. The kind of response I've had, and the last time I met a minister was about 2 weeks ago, and the kind of response I've had from them is a sort of grudging acknowledgement that there are some problems with the settled status scheme, but not really a full understanding about how difficult it might be for people to access it. And certainly there doesn't really seem to be a full understanding of the level of difficulty which people face, and the fact that they've got to live their everyday lives while carrying out this bureaucratic process, which is really quite onerous and can take quite a bit of time. And the nagging concern, which I've had from some residents, that if they don't complete the process, they might have to pay out a very large amount of money to gain full citizenship. And whilst some people are able to afford that, others may not be. And that in itself is also quite a lengthy and complicated process to navigate. I should also say that I've been working with Caroline Goipers and various other colleagues in Berkshire for Europe to support the cafes that you've been running. And I think that you're providing a really good service for lots of people. So that's a quick update on what I'm doing. I hope that that gives you a kind of quick and sort of potted history of the sort of activities I'm undertaking. I mean, I should also say that I'm having ongoing consultations with other stakeholder groups like trade unions and employers about their experience of the problems of the settled status scheme. And several of them have raised concerns to me about it along the lines that I've mentioned, or other issues.
Thanks, Matt. That's really good to know. Thank you for sticking around as long as you can before you hear that bell. If the audience want to ask any questions, they can ask a question in the Q&A box, and we'll come back to them afterwards. And if there's a question for you, Matt, and you're still there, hopefully you'll be able to answer them. But thank you for the moment, Matt. I'll next move to Elena Remedi. Thank you, Matt. So Elena is the founder and director of the In Limbo project. She's an interpreter and translator, originally from Milan in Italy, and has lived in the UK for the past 15 years. In the past 3.5 years, she and her group collected testimonies both from EU citizens in the UK and British ones living in the EU. They have published 2 books of testimonies, In Limbo and In Limbo 2, on the human impact of Brexit, and they've just released with Spokesman's Books, the publishing house of Bertrand Russell Foundation, new edition of In Limbo, with an introduction by Ian Dunt and a dedicated chapter on the settled status experience. So, Elena, can you tell us something about In Limbo and why you've put out a new edition and what the main issues are that people are finding?
Well, first of all, can you all hear me? First of all, good evening, everyone. Well, thank you, Maylan, for your question. Thank you, Open Britain Reading with Caroline, Eurocafe Berkshire and Berkshire for Europe for your very kind invitation. So as Mylan said in the introduction, the aim of the Limbo project is, and of our not-for-profit books, In Limbo and In Limbo 2, is to look at the human side, at the human impact of Brexit, and to give a voice to the 5 million, most of whom did not have a say in the referendum or in the past election. And speaking of EU citizens tonight, there's a sentence which comes to mind, and I'm sure that many of us have heard too often. Don't worry, you'll be fine. Well, sadly for many of us, this is not the case. We've gone from the promise of vote leave during the referendum, that nothing would change for us, to being reduced to bargaining chips for this government, to having our lives plunged, in some cases, into a deep and prolonged state of painful limbo. And now, well, we have settled status. For those who are not familiar with this scheme, EU citizens have been forced to apply, not register, to stay in their own home, a home sometimes of 50 or 60 years. And from the stories we recently collected for the book, it looks like there's still many unresolved issues with settled status. And this is why a new edition of In Limbo exists, with many more testimonies scattered throughout the various chapters, and a whole new chapter called Unsettled Status, because that's how we feel, unsettled. And focusing now on this chapter, one of the main themes linked to settled status is the worry about the lack of physical document, given settled status is only digital. I'm sure that Monique will elaborate more on that, but many EU nationals fear that this lack of a document to show to landlords, employers, banks, hospital, etc., will inevitably create discrimination. And I can assure you, it already is. Peter from the Netherlands writes, why, oh why aren't we given a physical document, not some stupid reference number for landlords and prospective employers to use to verify us on some website? It only encourages them not to want to have anything to do with us. At least with a physical document, you can say, see, here's my proof. I already fear the foundations are being laid for a second Windrush. And no, I cannot take the British government at its word. Would you, if you had experienced what we have experienced? We've become bargaining chips. We've been called queue jumpers, citizens of nowhere, people who've had the temerity to want to call the UK their home for too long. And so to give you a small example of this need for physical document, last week a Danish man was stopped at the Ryanair desk when returning to the UK. He was asked to show his visa or similar document. He explained he didn't need one because of course we are still in the transition period, but he had settled status, and yet he couldn't show it because, well, it's just a number. It took some convincing to be able to fly back to the UK, and this could happen to other EU citizens too. Of course they could check, but what if the system is down? Another issue emerging from the testimonies, and a very worrying one, is that of a hard deadline. Why? Because many are likely to miss it, particularly the most vulnerable ones. Matt rather said it. Not everyone, first of all, is fit to apply, is aware of the need to apply, or is easy to reach. And I'll give you some examples. A woman suffering from depression came to our group seeking for help for her father, affected by dementia. She had no idea of what to do and wasn't in the right state of mind to apply for her elderly father, who'd been living, by the way, in the country for more than 50 years. At one point, she disappeared. We tried our best, but she was nowhere to be found. We wonder what will happen to people like her father and families like these. Another example. Yesterday, a young woman had written to me in the past for help because her British partner was making it difficult for her to have the documents to apply. And you can imagine now how many victims of domestic abuse are in the same or worse situations. Told me that she has now discovered she has cancer. So she was too depressed. She felt too low to apply. It took really some convincing to direct her to a volunteer who could help her in her situation. Then there are people, even of working age, who have no idea they need to apply, and there are many. Take the story of Anna, a beautician from Bulgaria, who was all happy. She wrote to me that she had applied for settled status, but didn't know her daughter had to. So how many children, elderly, vulnerable people, victims of domestic abuse, minorities such as the Roma community will be left out? These are all people at real risk of remaining without legal status. They could be criminalized overnight, after, of course, June 2021. A year ago, Minister of State Brandon Lewis stated that people will be liable to deportation if they failed to apply within the deadline. Becoming illegal, or unlawful residents, I should say, means that people will experience the full force of the hostile environment. We're talking of tens of thousands of people who potentially could be left without legal status. So now the serious implications of the settled status are here under our eyes to see. And unless we do something, we will slowly but inexorably head towards a new and much bigger windrush. Yvette Cooper called it a windrush on steroids. In January, we were reassured there will be no automatic deportations. I'd like to, pause a moment, and, we've gone from nothing, would change for us to speaking of deportations. Isn't this normalization of the language frightening? And after these reassuring words, should we also be grateful for not having automatic deportations? The reality is that those who fail to apply won't be able to access the NHS, apply for jobs, rent, so they will have no choice but to leave or self-deport. So settled status hasn't really reduced the anxiety people felt before the scheme started. Many also worry that by having to inform the Home Office of any change when they move or their passport expires, they will have to start a lifelong relationship with the Home Office where mistakes could happen. Imagine the vulnerable ones, for instance, dealing with this over the years. How is this going to work? And these mistakes could lead to problems similar to those the Windrush generation experienced. Take the case of Ellie, who I'm sure is here tonight listening, a Dutch national of 78 living in the UK for more than 50 years, who first struggled to get a permanent residency, then had to convert PR into settled status, then had trouble with her married name, and then when the nth hurdle was overcome, she realized that the Home Office had changed her picture not once, not twice, but 3 times. Imagine the concern. She now checks every day, and she's currently seeking to apply through the Windrush scheme because at least she can have a document. Should she have been put through this at her age? I really don't think so. Many elderly people also wouldn't be able to cope with this sort of pressure. So they said that nothing would change, but here we are. A lot has changed for us. Our trust has gone as well. And how can we trust a government which wants to breach international treaties? It doesn't bode well, does it? So these are some of the issues you will find in in our new edition of In Limbo. But now, and I would like to speak to our British friends, I would like to say that In Limbo is also our love letter to Britain, a letter to a country which we've called home, sometimes for many years, and now we see taking a very dangerous path. And I would like to read some words from Ian Dunn's introduction. He writes, "If you listen closely, you will hear the heartbreak of those who were distanced from a place they felt they belonged to, who were ensnared in a bureaucratic machine they had not consented to, who were betrayed. But you will also hear something else, countless stories of love and affection, of people going out of their way to help their friends and family in the face of administrative indifference, or those who found bonds of solidarity in the face of a system which had turned against them. You will find the best of the human spirit." So this is why, dear friends, we now need all your support, all the support you can give us to make our voices heard. I will say more in the question and answers, but the moment our voices are no longer heard is when a new Windrush could happen under our eyes, under our noses, in total silence, in total indifference. And the moments when your rights too, other rights, could be taken, as they've done with your freedom of movement. So this is not only our battle, but it's a battle for a better, more tolerant, more inclusive, more democratic Britain for all, the Britain you represent. And, my final words to you, therefore, are let's not give up. Let's keep, holding this government to account, and let's keep making our voices heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you for that really powerful set of stories. I think when they become human, it really brings it home the anxiety that the settled scheme has brought. So thank you very much for that. We'll come back to you, say, in the Q&A. Anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question of Elena, please use the Q&A box. I'm going to move to Monique now. So Monique Hawkins has volunteered with the 3 Men since 2016 and works on their policy and advocacy activities. If you don't know, the 3 Million are a grassroots organisation who have campaigned for the rights of EU citizens in the UK since the Brexit referendum. Now, the topic you're going to talk about, Monique, is one which, to a person, every EU citizen I speak to in the UK mentions, which is physical proof of their settled status. So can you talk to us about the campaign to bring in the physical proof and how it's going? Over to you, Monique. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Melan, for the invitation, and thank you, Elena, for your contribution, and Matt as well. Yeah, so the 3 Million, we campaign on, as you know, free movement is ending. Free movement was a system whereby people had the right to live in each other's countries, and that obviously goes both ways. Brits could go and live anywhere else, rather than having to seek permission under that country's immigration system. So with free movement ending, obviously all EU citizens here, their right to be here changes, and instead they have to apply for this new permission. And as Elena said, we are very worried about people falling through the cracks. So we're campaigning on lots of different fronts, but one of those fronts is about the physical proof, and I'll talk just about that tonight. But on our website, you can see what we're doing on all the other fronts as well. So in terms of this digital proof, just to explain to anybody who doesn't know, until the end of June next year, EU citizens, because there's a grace period for applying for settled status, a 6-month grace period, that's dictated by the withdrawal agreement, until the end of June, we can carry on proving our rights with just our EU passport or EU national identity card. And in fact, no landlord or employer is even allowed to ask us for our settled status. Then on the 1st of July next year, we go in a big bang, no transition approach to a system whereby landlords and employers actually have to ask us to prove our status if we go for a new job or want to get a new rental, or if we want hospital treatment, open bank accounts, lots of things. And when we have to prove that status, the only way of doing that will be via a not particularly straightforward digital method. So there's no transition at all. Now, I'm not against digital systems per se. I mean, I really like the fact that I can pay my car tax online. I did it yesterday. But the point is that all the things that you can do online currently, there's a backup for. So even when I paid for my digital car tax, it says underneath it, you can also go to the post office to do it, because it's recognizing that although it might work for 80%, it might even work for 90% of people, it's not acceptable to sort of take that minority for whom it doesn't work and just go, oh well, never mind about them. And that's what's happening to us. And there's one country in the world that has actually now gone to a fully digital immigration system, and that's Australia. But they had a period of 8 years where people could get a physical backup for free, and then they had a further 3 years where people could get a physical backup, but they had to pay for it because obviously they were trying to phase it out. And so there was altogether an 11-year transition period to make sure that employers, landlords, citizens, everybody was used to this system. And here, like I say, it's big bang, 1st of July next year. And what I'd like to do now is to just talk through some of the problems and the vulnerabilities of this. And I've got an image which hopefully can be shared. So somebody will have to tell me once you can see that, because I can't tell. Sorry, is that up now? No? Well, never mind. I'll just, I've got an image that sort of shows 5 cogs, and it's kind of denoting all the various moving parts of a digital check.
I'm having some problems. I'll get the image up in a moment.
Yeah, okay, don't worry. And so this image, it's just 5 interconnecting cogs, and it's not trying to describe the process from start to finish, because that's lots and lots of steps, but it shows all the components that all have to work. So for a start, the applicant needs to have access to the passport that was linked to the status. So if they got status years and years ago, say, we're talking in the future now, and well, for example, consider a baby now whose parents get status for that baby, and they link the baby's current passport to that status. Over time, that person grows up, renews his passport, and maybe doesn't realize that every time they change their passport, they have to, like Elena said so beautifully, they've had to start a lifelong relationship with the Home Office, and they have to go and update their settled status with that new passport ID. If they don't do that, and they need to prove their status, the first time they want to prove that they can go to uni and pay home fees, or the first time that they go for a job or want to rent somewhere, they've just kind of lost the key to their status. They can't unlock the proof of their status. Oh, there we go. Secondly, even if you have the right document, you need access to the email and mobile number that were linked to the status. And this is actually almost the biggest concern that I have with that. Again, for people who are young, digitally literate, this is fine. I mean, I do it all the time. I get sent security codes on my phone. It's fine. But imagine somebody elderly who, in fact, I helped somebody locally get settled status last year. She didn't use email at all. So I had to set up an email address for her. She didn't have a smartphone. So I can't even, to be honest, remember exactly what we did about the phone, but we got through it somehow. If she now needs to prove that status, she needs access to that email. And if you don't use email every day, that's really not particularly trivial. There's vulnerable people who get organizations to help them apply, and the organizations actually use the email and phone number of the organization. Think of victims of human trafficking or in domestic abuse relationships who where somebody controlling them controls that key, that email and mobile number. You know, even if they manage to get away and they manage to take documents with them, you know, their passport alone is not enough. They don't hold the key to their status. And then on top of all of that, of course, you need to always have access to the internet or, you know, good Wi-Fi. The government websites must be up and running. We've had lots of cases already where it's kind of currently not working. So that can, in the moment, cause huge stress. And then the government databases must be correct and available. And we've already seen a couple of cases where somebody definitely had settled status and tried to bring up their proof of status, and it said can't find the photograph or cannot show proof of this person's status at the moment. We've had, like Elena mentioned, a friend Ellie, the photograph of her settled status was changed under her feet. So when the government frustratingly keep telling us the same lines, and they keep saying digital status can't be stolen, lost or tampered with, well, that's just not true. It can be tampered with. The problem is it can be tampered with by somebody outside our control. It can be lost if you lose the keys with which to access it. And stolen, I mean, we only have to look at the number of big data leaks and hacks that there have been. You know, people just don't feel secure without it. So we're running a very, very big campaign at the moment, all related to trying to get amendments to the immigration bill that's currently in the House of Lords. I can give you some more details later about how you can get involved in that. But yeah, I just wanted to set out the problems and why we think we absolutely need to have a physical backup to a digital status. Thank you.
Thanks, Monique. So thank you for that introduction to the Denied My Backup campaign. Like you say, we'll definitely be sending out an email to all of you afterwards, which will have links on how to contact or get involved with all the campaigns we're talking about. And we'll have someone asked if this is being recorded. Yes, it's being recorded, and it'll be available on YouTube afterwards as well. That will also be an email that you'll get straight after this webinar. Now, there have been quite a few questions coming in. I just want to ask one follow-up question to you, Monique, which is, we're working on this campaign to get physical backup. The government has said no, so what can we do, and how are we, or how is the campaign going to address the fact that the government has said no, they're not going to supply for backup?
Thanks. Yeah, well, obviously, if they keep saying no, then we don't get it. But we're just trying to keep pushing. I noticed that Matt was saying earlier that when he met the ministers, that he felt there was like a lack, which I really recognise. I mean, we struggle. We've asked twice in writing, possibly 3 times, to meet the minister, Minister Foster. and we just don't even get a reply to our request for a meeting, because I can't help thinking that if we could just have half an hour to sit round the table with him, he just has to understand this issue. But what we're trying to do is create a lot of noise. There's some amendments have been put down in committee stage in the Lords on this. They've been debated, they get withdrawn because that's normally what happens in the House of Lords, but we're going into report stage. And we are very, very hopeful of getting an amendment through. In January this year, when the Withdrawal Agreement Act was being debated, an amendment was passed by the House of Lords, which was actually on a declaratory status and physical proof of status. A lot of Conservative peers got behind it as well. And it was, in fact, the very first defeat for Boris Johnson's government. So we're very hopeful of getting to that point. Our campaign, which if you sign up to, like Mailan says, we'll send you the links afterwards. If you sign up, what we're doing is we're helping you to, with lots and lots of hints and tips and content and peers' email addresses. We want to get a letter writing campaign going. So we want to get hundreds and hundreds of letters written to peers to make sure they back this amendment and actually realise quite how important it is. When it then goes back to the Commons, which we think will be probably early to mid-October, we want to get everybody writing to their MPs. Now, with Boris Johnson's majority, it'll probably just get battered away, but by making so much noise, I just feel eventually we will get heard. Come July next year, we are going to see so many problems, and we'll have fought it every step of the way. And hopefully they'll compromise and see sense, because there is a system in place. Sorry, Milan. There's a system in place to give people physical proof, because non-EU citizens who apply to the settlement scheme already get a card. So the entire infrastructure is there. They wouldn't even have to invent anything. All they need to do is for those who request it to issue them a card. It's really simple, and it would just make so much difference to so many people.
Thanks, Monique. And I see from the lively chat going on that this has resonated with a lot of people sharing the same experiences. As we've been talking parliamentary matters, and we're lucky to have a real life MP on the line, perhaps I direct my next question to you, Matt, which do your colleagues in the Labour Party, your leader, do they share your concern? And indeed, have they got as in-depth a knowledge as you have of the settlement scheme? Because you clearly know quite a lot about it, but is it something that's discussed in the Labour Party, and how can we help to build the noise up in Parliament?
The answer to the first two questions is yes to both of them. So yes, it is being discussed, and yes, there's a high level of interest and awareness. I think the way that you can help is by giving specific examples, and I think also the point that Monique made about the infrastructure already being there is a really good one to use with the Home Office. And I would suggest also, when the legislation comes back to the Commons, that you might want to think about really trying to put some pressure onto the government by targeting some of their MPs in particular, because there's a real awareness of the issues amongst some MPs, but I think maybe particularly encouraging people to write in to government MPs would probably help a lot.
Great, thank you, Matt. So I'll move back to Elena now and ask. I see a lot of questions actually about technical questions. What are deadlines, and what happens about submitting passports and so on. Again, the link that we send out afterwards will direct you to sites have a wealth of information. There's the Settled organisation as well, who website who have lots of information about the practicalities of applying. But let's focus on some of the human aspects. And Elena, how can we support your campaign, and what would you like us to do for you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I agree with everything Monique and Matt have said. We need to make a lot of noise, and with with the first edition of In Limbo, we reached the public, and we've reached also more than 1,500 politicians and political figures on both sides of the channel. And I think that this has helped to raise awareness, of our plight. With this new updated edition with a new chapter on settled status, we would like to do the same. We would like to reach every MP or every person who can make a difference. And, so we're asking you, we are totally not for profit. I mean, all our royalties go into buying new books. We just invite you, if you can, to buy a copy, send it to your MP or to anyone you could think, could help. And this way it will be easier to raise awareness, because I think reading a whole chapter with one story after the other about the human impact of settled status will really help put it in perspective, make people understand through concrete examples. So my request today is this, and follow us, of course. Now you will get all the necessary links. And the books can be found, it's published by Spokesman's Books, the publishing house of the Bertrand Russell's Foundation. And they can be found on Amazon as well. And there's an ebook if you want to read it for yourself. So there's everything, and you've got the tools this way to make noise, to make our voices heard, as I was saying, because we weren't given one in the referendum, we weren't given one in the election. So that's, our only chance.
Thank you. I'll just ask a couple of questions now that came in before we started. So the first one, and maybe put your hand up or chip in if you want to answer, is a general one, quite topical. What would be the impact on EU citizens if the government reneged on their rights set out in the signed Brexit withdrawal agreement? Are we concerned that this might happen, given recent events?
Well, I can say something. I mean, obviously there is concern. I mean, it is very, very disturbing to even go near the principle of breaking an international treaty. I'm not really sure that they would do that with the citizens' rights part of the withdrawal agreement, because obviously there are 1.2 million Brits in the EU as well. I think that has been negotiated as a reciprocal part. I think there isn't the same sort of political tension or difficulty around that as there is around the Northern Ireland border. So I don't think it's a realistic thing to worry about. But having said that, I mean, obviously what's happened this week and last week is really scary. What I would say is we've already come across some differing interpretations of very detailed parts of the withdrawal agreement that we have raised with the Specialised Joint Committee, and there is indeed a different interpretation on this. It's to do with everybody with pre-settled status, whether they can use pre-settled status as a demonstrable right to reside for benefits. And this has made, we're sort of thinking, if this doesn't get cleared up in the Joint Committee, that we would probably have to take that to judicial review, and who knows whether it would end up in the Court of Justice. And what's happened this week makes me slightly less confident that even if we won that, whether the government would then concede. It just puts question marks around it. It makes me think the UK might just go, do you know what, it's not our interpretation, got to lump it. But
I agree. It's just about the interpretation. I mean, I don't think they'll go that far, but it's a question also of trust. People have lost their trust when they see these things happening, and so therefore that's why we need to make as much noise as possible to avoid, as you were saying, interpretations of things that could are in the favor, not in our favor. So
Thank you. Another question is, how can we reach the EU citizens who aren't even aware that they need to apply for settled status? And especially, I guess, examples you've given, victims of domestic abuse, people with mental health issues, children in care, and just generally people who think it doesn't apply to them because they've lived and worked here for 20, 30, 40 years. What can we do to get out to people and reach them? Elena, do you want to answer that?
Well, I think, I tend to speak personally. I speak about settled status all the time when I meet people. As soon as I meet an EU citizen, I always say, have you done your settled status? Have your children, done it? And I find that so many don't know about it. I mean, I remember going to Heathrow in a taxi, and the Romanian taxi driver told me he didn't need to do settled status because he had a national insurance number. So we're talking of a person, who might have been in his 30s with children, a family, of 3 people who could have missed out on that. So it's very important that each one of us speaks when, as I was saying, when they meet other EU nationals. And also, I think, I've, normally I buy the book. I've bought the books for neighbours, for people, who might know of other EU citizens, because again, the British public isn't completely informed. So the more we spread the awareness, the knowledge, the better it is, because more people will come to us, they will know. And I remember after, I spoke to this Romanian driver, it was 5 o'clock in the morning, and the poor man got, the full discourse from me. He called me because he had another Polish friend who hadn't heard about settled status. And, it's shocking in a way, because you think, they should have heard about it. But, the reality is that many haven't. So speaking up.
Yeah. And Matt, I mean, is there any plan to have, you talked about children in care in our constituency. How are we reaching out to those people? And is there a formal program or something that will avoid this Windrush scandal we're all scared of? I mean, is there any kind of joined up thinking on this?
I think the way to avoid it is to continue to apply pressure. So what we're doing at the moment, I think, is starting to be effective. I thought it was interesting that Monique said that Kevin Foster had said he wouldn't meet with her. I mean, he may well respond if there's more pressure put on him. And I think some of it's about understanding the scale of the problem. His constituency is in Devon, and I'm not sure if he has the number of EU residents that we've got in our area and the range of issues. So I think we just need to keep applying pressure and keep being assertive about it and pointing out quite how big a problem this is. And I think your point about the physical proof, the vulnerable people misunderstanding, is all really important. And I think that the work you're doing in the media is excellent, and I'm very keen to support that. Certainly at a local level, there's quite a bit I can do to promote it locally within Reading. And you might have seen that I've already written to all EU residents who are on the electoral register, talking to them about this issue. And I'm certainly going to stay in touch about it.
Yeah, can I just jump in there as well? Because what was I going to say? Just gone blank there. Yes, in terms of Kevin Foster, it's not that he has said he won't meet with us. He simply hasn't replied to us. So we feel we're being blanked. I mean, obviously what we've been calling for all this time is that there's got to be a declaratory status, so that you have the status in law, even if you've not registered, to get proof of that status. And the government keep twisting that against us and saying, no, but declaratory led to Windrush, so you're not getting that. But that's not what we're saying, because Windrush happened because at the time there was no incentive to register. In fact, when they did have a kind of retrospective registration process in 1988, they actively sort of wrote in their leaflet saying there's no real pressure to register. If you don't do this, there won't be any consequences. And we live in a very different world now. There's going to be immediate consequences. There is very definite incentive to register, and the efforts by the government has been pretty woeful. I mean, they've said that they've grant funded 57 organisations. Well, 57, that's kind of nothing. They've gave them 9 million between them last year, 8 million this year, and they seem to sort of think that is enough. And if I want to, if you compare it, somebody did a study on how successful these outreach programs can be. And one of the most successful program was for everybody going from analog to digital television, and they ran advert after advert on television, so it was incredibly effective, and it reached 97% of people before the deadline, which is just astonishingly good. But 3% didn't do it in time. So the day after the actual cut-off, they were faced with a blank screen, but their television wasn't confiscated then. They weren't thrown in prison. They could simply belatedly do it and put it right. And if there were just 3% of us who don't register, and there's no way it's going to be as good as that, but if it's just 3%, you're talking over 100,000 people. And what I do suspect the government is doing is they're saying if you have reasonable grounds, then you can apply late, and they're not issuing definitive lists of what those reasonable grounds are, but they have indicated to us they want to be flexible there. So they may well be really fairly generous about applying late, but there is a real legal problem, because if somebody applies late, it means that it could be like 5 years late before they realize they need this status, right? And the way the law is, it means that between the 1st of July next year and that date 5 years hence, when, let's say optimistically, they are allowed to apply late, for those 5 years, they will not have had a lawful status. So if they had, for example, run up an NHS bill because they needed hospital treatment, they could be facing a £50,000 bill, which legally they have. And even if, somebody throws up a petition and say, it's really unfair that this person should have to, and they waive the fee, say, they'll still have that on their credit record. The legal details of this matter. So it's just not on, even if they go for the reasonable grounds thing to allow people to apply late, it's not on that people will lose their lawful status after the 1st of July next year.
Actually, it's children it's worrying, because many children might not know, might realize many years later. So I think, some groups might not even be a year or two. It might be, when they need, as you were saying, they go to hospital, but it could happen much later. So what happens then?
Yeah, and this is exactly what happened in, I don't really like comparing us to Windrush particularly, but a story like that happened, that somebody sort of first found out they didn't have this status when they faced a huge hospital bill. And just tonight, we have co-signed a letter together with Migrants Organise about people who lack mental capacity and the problems around that if somebody hasn't sorted out a lasting power of attorney. There are real problems around, who can apply on their behalf, and the government, the letter, it's a really good one, we'll be publishing it tomorrow. The government has promised guidance on this and hasn't produced it. So our frustration is, it's all very well, all these warm words saying, you're welcome, you're our friends, neighbours, colleagues, we want you to stay. I can sort of say it in my sleep, but the legal details of the edge cases, that is just not being addressed, and our concerns are just not being heard.
Yeah, and I think looking at some of the comments going by on chat, it's incredibly sad that a hostile environment has been created. People are thinking about leaving the UK. Those of us who live here love the multicultural aspect of this country. The enrichment that the EU citizens bring to this country and make it a lovely place to live in. And it's just so sad to see these comments of people talking about moving back because they're made to feel unwelcome, and because it's opening up for discrimination where employers, landlords and so on will choose the person who's readily got a British document in their hand to prove that they're eligible. So I think this is sad. I want to end on an upbeat note, if possible. I want to thank everyone for joining. This is great to see so many people supporting and interested in making some changes to the situation for EU citizens in the UK. I'll go around the table and just ask everyone to say a few final words. I'll start with you, Matt, just in case your bell does start ringing to go and vote. Any final words from you?
Thanks very much for that. It's very thoughtful of you. So far we're okay, so I'll keep my fingers crossed. I'd like to stay in touch really, and to keep getting ideas from you and points about problems with the existing system. And I also wondered if we could perhaps have another Zoom meeting in a few weeks' time.
Absolutely, we're more than willing to meet with you, and there are, as you can see, this is just the tip of the ice. There are so many stories and experiences and examples to share. The campaigns are very well organised, and there's lots of material to share. So thank you so much for joining us. Elena, any final words?
Marion, could I add one other thing? Or this is really a request, actually. If I'm still, am I muted or?
Yep.
Would you mind if I invited some of my other colleagues?
No, you're not muted.
To Sparkship in Europe, but I'd quite like to invite some other colleagues as well. And I also just wanted to thank everybody for their time and their effort they put into this. I found it really useful. It helps fill in a lot of detail. Really, really helpful. I've come across certain aspects of this, but not every single one that you've mentioned tonight. So I found it really helpful and useful, really interesting. And with a lot of these issues, it's the detail that's the really important bit. And I think we just need to be aware there's a lot of different problems out there and to try and keep campaigning on it.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, Matt, the more the merrier. We want to talk to lots of people. So of course we'll do that. Let's stay in touch. Elena, I'll hand over to you.
Yes, I just want to thank everyone for the for the wonderful contributions. I think they're very helpful, and I hope that you will support us in sharing awareness, in raising awareness, and sharing our books. Send them to your MP, send them to whoever you think might help. And thank you for Maylan, and thank you everyone for the kind invitation.
Thank you, Elena. And Monique, any closing words or calls to action from you?
Please sign up at our we've created a dedicated little website for this called deniedmybackup.org.uk, and if you go on there, as well as getting information, there's 2 buttons everywhere, and the 2 buttons are Act Now, which basically signs you up to a newsletter, and Donate, because we're running a small fundraiser to help us do some targeted digital advertising, and we used it to create a poll, which I didn't even get to talk, which I didn't even remember to talk about tonight, but we did a poll amongst employers. But if you sign up for our newsletters, you will get instructions and help for how to write to peers. And I would just like to dedicate this call to action to a very dear 3 million colleague of mine, who back in 2017 got writing to the House of Lords when we had our first letter writing action, and she wrote to over 40 peers. And it, together with lots of other people, did lots of writing, and it really made an impact. There were peers standing up in the House of Lords mentioning the 3 million. It's when we were first put on the map, I think. And it at the time, it helped raise awareness about the comprehensive sickness insurance problem. So letter writing really, really, really helps. But if you sign up, you'll get our newsletters, and we will publish literally sort of spreadsheets with email addresses, which peers to write to. And yeah, please sign up, deniedmybackup.org.uk.
Thanks, Monique. And yes, like I said before, we will be sending out an email with, look, Elena's holding up a book,
yes,
so you can recognise it. We'll be sending out an email with all the links, including how to buy the In Limbo book, how to sign up for the Denied My Backup campaign, how you can get support for applying for settled status. Please share with all your friends, all your enemies, share with everyone. Let's get the word out there. And once again, thank you so much for joining this really important call. I hope you enjoyed it. All feedback welcome. I think we'll close the call there. Thank you very much. And thank you, Stuart, for all your technical help. Well.
Thank you.